Hello and welcome to Friday Live. I am Amanda Farmer and we are going out to the Your Strata Property Facebook page, also out to LinkedIn and out to YouTube this Friday afternoon. It is wonderful to be here with you all chatting about our week in Strata, our busy week as always. I was here a couple of weeks ago with our last Friday Live, and at that time I was wondering if you were all dry, if you were all okay, how many of you were underwater. We talked a little bit about how we might deal with our flood affected apartment buildings, and now a couple of weeks on, some of you might be drying out. And I do think that this is where the real work for our strata managers begins. Now you can start going through that long list of requests, of complaints, of demands, needs for work orders, and of course, chasing down contractors, none of whom are available as you need them. So my heart goes out to you. I am still thinking of you all there in the cleanup process. If you have any questions about that process that you want to throw into the chat here, I'll be happy to come around and give you a helping hand if I can. We've already got a few of you coming on in, keen beans here on our Friday afternoon. If you'd like to drop me a hello here in the comments on Facebook or over on LinkedIn, on YouTube, I am here seeing those comments on Facebook, and we can reply to you here by calling you out, and anything that you might post on LinkedIn or on YouTube that might need a link or some attention, I will come back around to when I can. So I am seeing Cheryl here saying hello. Hello, Amanda. I have a friend of mine. Her name is Kat. Very, very good friend of mine. And when we talk on the phone, my husband always knows that it's Kat because I answer the phone, hello, hello. And she does the same. We don't realize we're doing it. Never realized I was doing it until my husband said, what is this, like Mrs. Doubtfire? What is this? So I get it. Cheryl, lovely to see you, and hello, and thank you for the bunch of flowers. Petra is saying, good afternoon, Amanda from Shell Harbour. Great to see you, Petra. Jeff is here saying, hiya. Love it. Not a hello, but a hiya. How you going, Jeff? And Zlata is saying, hi. Appears I can't write your name. Another one keeps popping up. Yes, if you're on Facebook, which you are there, Zlata, if you're trying to say, hello, Amanda, you may be tagging your friend, Amanda, so be careful of that one. Good to see you, Zlata. Joe is here saying hello. Bruce is here today walking in the sun on Shelley Beach. Nice one, Bruce. You do get around. You do get around, Bruce. Always good to know where you are. I am just scrolling on up. My screen is frozen. One sec. I don't think I've frozen, but I do have. Wow. Okay, I think those comments are coming through quickly. John is here saying howdy. Nice to see you, John. Hope everybody is doing well. Lots of you here today. Perhaps you are keen to hear from our special guest, and maybe my teaser email that went out this afternoon has piqued your interest in how do we add value to our properties? How do we tap into the positives of apartment ownership? And my guest today is definitely someone who knows a lot about getting the most value out of property. I'm going to be welcoming him in very, very soon. But first, how many of you were on my Pro Member webinar yesterday? Lots and lots of fun delivering that webinar, the nuances of notices to comply, it was called. I walked our members through my step-by-step process for completing a valid notice to comply with a bylaw, and I also demonstrated how you can craft a winning penalty application before the New South Wales Tribunal. So I shared with our members who were there on the webinar why you should be worried if an owner goes quiet after being served with a notice to comply with a bylaw. I shared how my lot owner client recently forced their owners corporation into somewhat of an embarrassing position in penalty proceedings before the tribunal. I uncovered a surprising aspect of the bylaw compliance process for community schemes, not something I had come across before, but we got into it on the webinar. And I discussed what it means to begin with the end in mind. They're just a few things that we talked about on the webinar. I also gave all of our webinar attendees access to their very own webinar workbook. Now, I decided to put this webinar together for our pro members and go deep on the topic of notices to comply with bylaws and penalty applications after I briefly mentioned it in a podcast chat with Rena Van Alst. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, podcast episode number 303. I was sharing a win for a client of mine in the tribunal on a penalty application. And I referred to the strata manager who ran the application for their owners corporation and hinted at a few things that went wrong with that application and therefore led to my clients being successful in defending that application. So I had a few of you reach out to me, touch base and say, Amanda, I'm an owner and I'm experiencing exactly this problem in our building at the moment. It doesn't seem the owners corporation understands what they're doing when it comes to enforcing bylaws. Strata managers being a little bit nervous and saying, Amanda, we want to know more about what went wrong here to make sure that we don't fall into that same trap with our clients. So I decided to go deep on the topic with a pro member webinar. Now, if you haven't heard about these pro webinars, this is something new that I started this year for those members who are on a pro membership with us inside the Your Strata Property community. The level of education delivered at a pro webinar is more in-depth than previous webinars you might have attended. There's lots of practical how-to information. I give real-life examples from the tribunal, from the courts, and from my own experience with clients of my legal practice. Now, our strata managers and our property professionals can claim CPD points for attending pro webinars, and the webinar replays get banked to our CPD library, which is inside our pro membership. Now, what I would like to do today, before we welcome in our special guest, is take you over and show you a little sneak peek at yesterday's pro webinar. I will do that in just a sec. First, I will go back to these comments and say hello to those who have come on in. Henry's here saying good afternoon. Hope Mudgee is good. Indeed, Henry, that is where I am today. And I was just noticing just before I went live that a storm has come over. So that's why it looks like I'm kind of standing in the dark here. I've got my lights blazing so you can see me, but it is getting darker and darker here. Not sure what kind of a weekend we might be in for. Sean is here saying good afternoon. Amanda, great to see you here. Sean, and Pamela is here saying hello. Good to see you too, Pamela. Alrighty, now I'm going to take you over and give you a little 60-second or so sneak peek at our pro member webinar from yesterday, all about the nuances of notices to comply and how to craft a winning penalty application before the tribunal. So here we go. Now, I am sharing my video here on the screen. I'm going to hit play, and then you are going to hear me on the webinar replay. Here we go. Okay, so really helpful set of directions there. They are standard directions in my experience. And this should have, in the case that I was involved in, this should have tipped off the strata manager that this is not a case they should be running for their owners corporation, that they did not have the evidence that they needed, that they did not understand the procedures, the rules in place to comply with the tribunal's directions, and the bundle of material that was served on the 22nd of December did not comply with these directions, did not have evidence in admissible form. So I spent time pointing that out to the owners corporation in my reply submission, and the owners corporation made the decision to withdraw the application after reading what it was that I had put to them. So you don't want to be in that situation as a strata manager or as a committee member who might be driving one of these applications for your community. You really need to understand how important it is to get these things right. Alrighty, how do we craft a winning penalty application? So we've heard Little peek there at our pro member webinar delivered yesterday. I was sharing there the standard directions that the tribunal issues on penalty applications, and I went into some detail about how the owners corporation in that case failed to comply with and perhaps I think understand what those directions meant, which led to my client being able to move on happily from that litigation. Now, if you missed the webinar, not to worry, there is a way that you can still access it. I'm giving all members of the Your Strata Property online community the opportunity to access the webinar replay, but you only have until midnight this Sunday, the 20th of March, to snap that up. Now, being a pro member webinar, being packed with value, the replay is available to members only for the heavily discounted price of $97. For non-members, the webinar replay is $229. Rochelle is going to put in the comments here, and we may head over to LinkedIn, Rochelle, not to put the pressure on you, to pop them in over there as well, the link to the members only access to the webinar replay. Just make sure, members, that you are logged in before you click that link so that you can get the members only discounted pricing. Once you grab your copy of the replay, you'll get the link to your inbox. It is yours to watch at any time you like or as many times as you like, but you do need to grab it before midnight this Sunday, and that's Eastern Daylight Time. If you're a pro member or you're a member who was on the webinar yesterday or already registered for the webinar yesterday, you've secured your spot. The replay link has been sent to you in your inbox this morning. So have a look over at your inbox if you're looking for the replay link. And I think that's it. Oh no, I have a non-member link for you as well. If you're not a member, you're not a pro member, and you still want to access this webinar replay at $229, then Rochelle has the non-member link for you as well. So she's going to pop those here in the comments. She's already done that. She's a gem. Absolute gem. I should interview Rochelle on a Friday Live, shouldn't I? About how she does all of this. She gets so many words of thanks and appreciation in our inbox. I'm sure some of you would love to meet Rochelle on a Friday Live. Mwah! We love you. Thank you, Rochelle, for helping us out. Another webinar I have to mention before I welcome in our special guest today, not one of my webinars, but a webinar brought to you by our friends at Lookup Strata. How many of you get the Lookup Strata newsletter to your inbox each week? Fantastic newsletter. Nikki Jovic, she has been a guest on our lives, a guest on our podcast, doing fabulous work there from over in Western Australia, covering all of our Australian strata jurisdictions. And she's had some fantastic guests for webinars recently. And I want to let you know about a webinar that is happening on the 31st of March, also involving friends of mine, Christopher Kieran and Alison Benson from Kieran Benson Lawyers. Not sure if Alison's involved there, but I do see Chris's name here. Chris Kieran from Kieran Benson Lawyers is joining Nikki at Lookup Strata. It's a webinar for strata managers, lot owners, committee members, other strata professionals. If you want to understand what's going through the minds of apartment owners when they're faced with building defects and large repair bills, it's really important to understand mindset so that appropriate strategies can be put in place to address building defects. And that is what Chris, Kieran, and Nikki are going to be talking about on the webinar. Chris is also going to talk about the most important person in the building when it comes to rectifying building defects. If you're a strata manager, you can get CPD points for attending the webinar. You can put questions in so they can be answered before the webinar. It is a free webinar that's happening with thanks to Lookup Strata on the 31st of March, 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So Rochelle has a link here for you to register via Zoom. That is the link that we have been invited to share by Nikki at Lookup Strata. 31st of March webinar there for you, all about the building defects process and mindset for committee members, for owners, and the importance of understanding what's going through people's minds. Building defects, not an area that I get into in my legal practice. I do respect people like Chris Kieran at Kieran Benson Lawyers, where that is their specialty. Tough work. And I know there are many here in our community who listen to our lives and who are in our members forum who are going through that pain of building defects. So I do encourage you to go ahead and register for that Look Up Strata webinar. I'm seeing some I do's in the, some hands up and some I do's in the comments here. I forgot what I asked you. I forgot what you're saying I do to. Me too. Patricia is here. No need to apologize for being late, Patricia. You are always welcome at any time. And Cassandra is saying, I'm looking forward to that one. Yes, that webinar on our building defects process. Yep, good one to register for there, Cassandra. All righty, awesome. We're all rolling today. So good to have you all here, getting ready, getting excited for our special guest. And I am about to welcome him in right now. His name is Rob Flux. Rob is the owner and founder of Property Developer Network, the largest national network of novice developers and renovators. Now, Rob has a personal goal to set 1,000 people financially free by the year 2030 and is doing this through a combination of monthly networking events in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, multiple online Facebook communities, live training events, and a 12-month education program to support novice developers throughout their journey. Now, having started initially as 5 mates sitting around Rob's kitchen table, the Property Developer Network is now the largest national networking group in Australia, dedicated to property development, with a combined community of over 13,000 people within the brands of Property Developer Network and RenoSave. Initially starting with monthly meetup and networking events in Brisbane in 2012, the network has now expanded to include a Sydney and Melbourne chapter, with all 3 cities running regular events, sharing knowledge from industry experts, real deals from within the community, and a unique masterminding experience, replicating that early kitchen table experience. Via the Property Developer Network, Rob is helping to kickstart people's property development careers, having seen a number of his members leave their day jobs to transition to full-time property development, and many more who are well on their way. Rob's philosophy is simple. Individually, we are limited to solving our problems by our own worldly experience, but together we can solve most of the problems that people are likely to experience in property development and all progress forward collectively. That is definitely an ethos, a mantra that we subscribe to here in our community. Also, I welcome in Rob Flux.
Hey, Amanda, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Rob.
I'm going to keep that recording for that intro. That's one of the best intros I've ever had. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for the inspiration. It's just what we do here. Just what we do.
Well, I've got nothing left to say now. You've taken all my words away. That's fantastic.
And we're done. Early mark. No, it's wonderful to have you here with us. And I know you are doing such great work with members inside your community. I just love hearing that people are able to achieve their dreams of leaving their day jobs because they can tap into the power of property development. And I especially, of course, brought you here today to talk about developing our strata title properties, because I know sometimes that gets overlooked a little bit. And sometimes I get invited by people like you and those in your space to talk about strata in a property development context. And often people are saying, oh, never thought about that before.
Absolutely.
So now, Untapped.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to start by saying I'm Queensland based, so our terminology is different. So I'm going to slip from time to time to say body corporate when you're probably saying owners corporation and things like that. But, you know, I think there's a few other names around the country. So maybe we could start with that for everyone, or you've probably done that a million times.
No, well, we can. We do have all types, all kinds, all welcome here on our Friday Lives and in our community. So we have our Queenslanders who call our communities body corporates. We in New South Wales talk about owners corporations. Victoria, I understand, is also owners corporations. Strata, the word strata is not really a thing in Victoria. I know we've got a couple of Victorians tuning in here today. We have strata companies in Western Australia, which I find always a little bit confusing, because it makes me think of strata management companies, but their owners' corporations are called strata companies. So yeah, lots of fun. But you're generally based in Queensland, even though, as I've said, you have these meetups along the East Coast?
I sometimes forget where I live because I'm traveling so much. I'm generally in Sydney and Melbourne several times a month, but yes, based here in Brisbane.
Good on you. And how did you get started on your property development journey?
Well, I started firstly with a investment journey of 20 years, and bought my first house at 18, first investment property at 21, and was fortunate enough to own my first house outright at the age of 24. So I thought this negative gearing type approach was really good. My first investment property was actually an apartment in Darwin, overlooking the beautiful Casuarina Beach, so for anyone who knows that area. And after 20 years of doing that, was in a position where I should have been able to financially retire, but regrettably got divorced. And I didn't want to wait 20 years to do it again. And so that's where the property development side came in. I went, well, how do I replicate what I did, but I don't want to wait 20 years? So I guess the concept of forcing value onto the property and not having to wait for the market, right? So using our knowledge, our skills, and our experience, we can pretty much make money in any market, up, down, or sideways, if we know what we're doing. And that's the big if.
Yes,
So
if you know,
so
if you
that
know
was
what
the
you do.
concept. Yeah, in doing that, I guess went and educated myself, paid a lot of mentors, and I'll use inverted commas for that. A lot of people will refer to them as spruikers to try and educate me. Walked away with some very empty pockets, very motivated, very inspired, but didn't have a lot of knowledge and skill. And that's when the 5 mates idea came to fruition. I read a book by a gentleman by the name of Napoleon Hill. The book's called Think and Grow Rich, and he talked about the power of a mastermind. And that is exactly what you touched on. And that is that the collective knowledge of everyone then goes together to create ideas that none of us would come up with by ourselves. So we got 5 mates together, and as we started to get success, a mate invited a mate, they invited another mate. And before I knew it, I was running a public networking group. And we went officially live in August of 2012 at the Brisbane City Council Library. Now, the one small fact that you didn't get right, we're now 14,500 people in our community, and growing almost at an exponential rate. And that because the word of mouth side of things is working fantastically for us. And it's all about paying it forward and helping others first.
And just to clarify for our viewers, your network is not just about teaching people how to invest in property, become property investors. You are actually talking about property development. So can you explore that with us a little bit more? What are some of the things your members are learning in your community? What are they achieving specific to property development?
Well, we might put the distinction between investor and a developer first. So an investor tends to put a small amount of research into an area up front with the view of a long-term capital gain. And so the drivers that drive that are very, very different to a property developer who's trying to force the value on, and they're trying to turn that property over in a much shorter period of time. So often we listen to market commentators that are talking about, what this, the next hot spot and all that sort of thing. But in a property development sense, that hot spot might be a completely different thing because it's driven by very different outcomes. And so we're trying to teach our guys and girls that what are the drivers that actually, require people to need new houses, need new apartments, need new townhouses, etc. And by knowing where the demand is going, we're going to put the opportunity in front of them before they know they need it.
Interesting. Now, do you have many people in your community who have tapped into the power of developing strata-titled properties, or body corporates, as you might call them, in Queensland?
Absolutely. Well, it's not just Queensland, it's all the way around the country. But yes, so there are 2 primary different streams that people go down when they're starting to do property development. One is a land subdivision stream, and one is, the multi-res, where it might be townhouses or apartments. So both of those actually have a strata component to it from time to time. Land subdivision, You can have community title subdivisions that do happen from time to time, a little bit less common, but that they do actually occur. But I guess for anyone who's doing duplexes as their starting spot and then they start to grow, I guess the difference is, are you scaling out or are you scaling up? That's really the difference. But yes, many of our folk go down that path.
Now, we here in the strata management space, strata dispute space, putting up my hands as a strata lawyer, we often see what happens at the other end of a development, sometimes a few years down the track. And I'm sure there are a number of people watching, listening, thinking, I am in a situation where the property developer made some mistakes or perhaps didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver when this development was set up, whether it's low rise or high rise. So I want to call out the elephant in the room and just jump straight in there. What do you think that there are property developers in the strata space making mistakes, and what kinds of mistakes do you say they are?
So undoubtedly they are, and that's because we are all humans and none of us are perfect. But it's probably more the fact that a lot of us are naive to the needs of, I guess, the ultimate buyer. And we're not putting ourselves into the space of that ultimate buyer and go, well, what is it that they actually want? They want a combination of usability and amenity. They want, I guess, they want rules to be in place so that people don't go rogue, but they don't want the rules to be too tight so that they can't have the flexibility they want. So you need to have a good balanced approach in how that goes. And that's going to change very differently based on, well, who is the ultimate buyer? Is the ultimate buyer an owner-occupier, or is the ultimate buyer an investor, or are you trying to do a blended approach? So sometimes where that, I guess, nexus is between, is it too tight? You want to be Goldilocks, not too tight and not too, you want to be just right. Yeah.
And I imagine with your community, I know, having had a look a little bit at what you do, you're often working with people who are new to property development. They're moving from maybe that amateur to that professional stage. So you're not necessarily, tell me if I'm wrong, dealing with those big property developers that we might see developing multi-story apartment buildings in our capital cities, and then moving on, selling the whole lot off the plan, and then moving on to the next development. Can you give us a bit of a flavor of who your members are who are developing strata title properties?
Absolutely. So generally they are novice to, I guess, aspiring developers that would do something, a 6-pack and below kind of size is typically where our folk live. But what is really interesting, Amanda, is that the statistics when it comes to most councils are that the big developers get the glory because they're doing big stuff, but about 80 to 90% of all development applications into council are 6-packs and below. And that's a really interesting stat where we've got entry level and novice people doing these projects that are creating most of the stock out there. But most of us tend to complain about the big stuff. It's the little stuff that needs a little bit more TLC.
Yeah, really interesting. And how many of these developers, novice and maybe a little bit more experienced, developing these smaller parcels, how many of them do you think would say, yeah, I understand strata, I understand body corporate, are going in with their eyes open and knowing what's ahead of them?
I'm going to say it would be fair to say that at least 80% probably haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're relying on experts like yourself to guide them in the right direction. In many instances, they'll be, I guess, going directly to a body corporate or a strata manager and doing some sort of arrangement with them to say, well, I want to minimize my cost to the project. And then that strata manager will typically write the rules for them. And that's always so that person can then get the business at the end of that and actually looking after the strata at the end. So sometimes the developer doesn't really understand what is coming back from that building manager, strata manager, I should say, because of the fact that it's written in their favor because they want the work. And so they've probably got some templated things that, just cookie cutter that out as many times as we can, rather than, well, what's the uniqueness about this particular project? And, maybe there's a particular outcome that we're looking for. And I don't think it goes to the level of customization for that.
Yeah, the level of customization that's needed to then produce functioning, healthy communities. Very good point that you make there, that it is the strata manager or the body corporate manager engaged by the developer to help them set up the development, and therefore where they're getting their template, you're right, template rules or bylaws prepared by that strata manager, they're going to be in the interests of the developer. It's something for our owners, potential future owners looking at off the plan purchases, to be very aware of. But your developers, especially those who you serve in your community, Rob, may not be well served by that. If it's a smaller development where they want to hold one or two apartments, want to keep it in their family, may have future plans for that property that the strata manager just isn't aware of, because that conversation doesn't happen. There's a real missed opportunity there, I think, for the developer to customize, as you say.
Absolutely, and the likelihood of keeping that stock is relatively high. There's a general rule of thumb that most property developers are aiming for a 20% return. And so if they get a 6-pack type project, then when you sell 5, that pays for the cost. And so the 6th one is for free. And so the developer is ultimately trying to become an investor and hold stock with a passive income, but they end up being a victim of their own project. And there's a whole bunch of gotchas that happen in that, not just in the strata space, but also in the homeowner's warranty insurance space and a whole bunch of things like that, where the developer quite often isn't protected because they were the one who created the stock in the first place. So they're deemed to be the one that is at fault, given that was all created at their instruction.
And perhaps having that little bit more knowledge going in to understand how complex it really is. Complex. Once the strata scheme is set up, the owner's corporation, body corporate is functioning, there's a lot of gotchas there, and increasingly so in our legislation when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to the power to change things after a strata plan's been registered as a developer. Do many of your members go off and get legal advice from a strata lawyer, or they don't even think that person exists?
I'm going to say it's probably the latter, that they don't even think that person even exists. They will go to, I guess, the strata managers that are likely to look after the product at the end, and they will be seeking their advice from them. And it's, you made a comment before that it's usually in the developer's interests, and that might be the case, but I think it's more out of naivety because the strata managers are giving the template. So I think it's more the strata managers, I guess, ease of management interests over above any development interests.
Yeah. And I do know there are, just to give some credit to our strata managers, there are managers out there and consultants as well in this space that refer their client developers to strata lawyers to be able to say, okay, well, this is a complex scheme, or we need to think about a few other things. So your standard model rules that might be in the legislation are not going to cut it for this development. So you should go to this particular person who can set up some customized rules for you. And I think it's really important for developers to see that that's in their interest. It's not just for the future owners of the properties.
Absolutely, which is why it's so important that people like yourself and myself are cross-pollinating between each of our communities to make sure that, we learn your stuff and you learn our stuff, and we're all trying to, I guess, be somewhere in the middle. That's kind of the best negotiation, is when both sides are equally unhappy.
I like that. Spoken like a lawyer.
Yes.
I don't use the word least unhappy. I say least uncomfortable.
I can live with that.
Now, do you have some people in your community, Rob, that are renovators and they are purchasing properties, whether strata title or not, and adding value through renovating, not necessarily doing a major development?
There absolutely would be, but it'd be less. We're less of a renovator type community. Typically, that would only occur where you acquire a property and the existing house has too much intrinsic value, and you tend to do something at the back. So putting 2 townhouses at the back of an existing house, I guess there's some gotchas when it comes to that. Do you want a existing house on the strata plan where there's two brand new properties? Probably not. That's probably not going to be in the best interest of the sinking fund. So you want to start to work out, well, do we want to sometimes actually carve off that house onto its own title, sell it as an independent title by itself, and then let the new complex all live by itself. But sometimes the logistics of the site just don't allow that. So there are challenges there. I guess try to renovate before the strata's created in those instances.
Yeah, I'm often asked about undoing that situation. So I'm glad that you've called that out as a gotcha, where you have a community that has been strata titled and it has this weird standalone structure, and it might be a heritage structure that had to stay there, and then when the strata title plan's been drawn up, that's been nominated to be a one lot. And I've had one very recently that comes to mind. I think it was a member inside the community. We were talking about it on a member call about a standalone lot inside a strata plan. I think it's a townhouse development. But on the plan, this structure is entirely lot property. There's no designation that any part of it is common property. The strata plan has a notation. It's all lot property. And there's an interesting question that has arisen as to whether the owner's corporation is therefore responsible for ensuring the structure of that building. And our New South Wales legislation around requirements for strata building insurance, I have a particular view on it, but I have to say it's not as black and white as it could be. And so it has created this uncertainty around insurance. Insurance premiums are going up, especially for our owners' corporations, and especially now. And it's a worthwhile issue to investigate and spend some money on. But a small community, just another headache for them to resolve.
Yeah, the general reason why that structure is kept is because there's too much intrinsic value for the existing structure. So there's an expense to knock it down, and there's another expense to rebuild another one. And by the time you do that transaction, the arbitrage between that and what you can resell just doesn't make sense. And so that's why they tend to be kept. Where humanly possible, you want to put it on its own standalone title. Sometimes that gets tricky because of the fact that you're only allowed one driveway in and out of the property. You might be on a main road, things like that. In instances like that, my encouragement is to have it on its own title. You might use the common driveway, but maybe have an easement to allow access for that property on. So that the easement sits on the body corporate, but the actual responsibility for the property isn't. That's the balance, but sometimes it just can't be done.
Yeah, and you really have to be thinking ahead for these things. And if you're a developer who's developing for sale, then maybe thinking ahead is not really something that you're all that focused on. But I know the communities that end up in those sticky situations really do suffer.
Actually, you used a phrase before my intro, which was one I use all the time, which is start with the end in mind. If you know exactly what the outcome is, what you're trying to sell, who the people are that you're trying to sell it to, you want to work backwards from that and say, well, what's the best outcome that I'm going to achieve for those people? In the end, Joe Public, who buys our finished product, they don't want any of these hassles, and we make money by solving problems for them. So the last thing we want to do is leave a problem behind, because that impacts our resale value, it impacts the management costs, it impacts everything. So we want to really start with that end in mind. What's the finished product going to be? Who's it going to be? Who's the ultimate owner going to be, and what are they going to use it for? And then design specifically for that.
And the other word of caution that I suppose that I would add for your community, Rob, is that owners, the ultimate purchasers, the ultimate owners of these properties are becoming really smart about how strata title works, about what their rights and obligations are, and they're starting to be clued in to these red flags. And I think if developers of strata title properties are not thinking ahead, as you say, and beginning with the end in mind, then they're going to see that reflected in what they can ultimately achieve for the property. Because of education resources like this one, it's easy to get online, get a copy of this chat, and owners looking to buy into a new development going, oh, hang on a sec, I better find out whether
I was
my
about to
community
say that the reason why they're informed is your fault, Amanda. You're out there telling people what they need to be careful of. So,
all my fault. Yes.
high five.
I can't say it's the first time I've been blamed. Yeah. I'm just heading over to the comments here. We have a comment from Sean, and I will read it out. Sean says he's got friends who live in a 30 to 40 lot scheme with what looks like a heritage lot. It always scared me, considering the common property implications, as it's right in the middle of the scheme. And Sean's just posted a follow-up comment saying, I doubt it's subdivided separate title. It may all be lot property. Yeah. Sounds like a very similar situation to the one I was discussing last week, Sean. And I do, yeah, I see these kinds of structures cause all sorts of problems when it comes to unit entitlement as well, Rob. And I don't know if you have this conversation inside of your community with members, the unit entitlement being what dictates how much people pay in levies, what their proportionate share is, and then what their voting rights are as well on certain resolutions. And sometimes when you have these larger structures or different parcels of land inside a development, you're going to have different unit entitlements, different voting rights. And if that's not something as a developer that you understand you're across, especially if you're going to hold, it could be another gotcha.
Yeah, at the scale that our community operate, that's probably less of an issue. But as the projects get bigger and bigger, that somebody with a penthouse is going to feel that they're a little bit more important than somebody on the ground floor. So they're going to want a little bit more voting rights. But that, as I said, because of the size of our projects, that tends to not be. But as our folk graduate to become, I guess, professional developers, that then starts to become something, I guess, in their future. So, getting people like yourself in to educate them, Amanda, is always a good thing.
I have another example, and I'm seeing this more often, which you may start to see in your community, of building into airspace that is part of a strata title development. And this one I was looking at earlier this week was actually a proposal to build 2 new penthouse units on top of the existing building. Well, of course, the owner of it's an 18-story building. The owner, who's in apartment 18A, which is currently the top floor, is not very happy about that proposal. So that owner has gone off and engaged lawyers and has said to the owners corporation, who is proposing this major value add project to build these 2 new penthouses, has said to the owners corporation, well, you just can't do this. You can't do it because we don't agree. And the owners corporation's lawyer has said, actually, we can. And even if you don't agree, as long as we have a special resolution, we're upgrading the common property, we're improving the common property, we can do it. And oh gosh, I would hate to be that penthouse owner, soon to be not penthouse owner.
I was about to say they are soon to be not penthouse owners. Yes.
Yeah. So all sorts of things as a developer. I know some buildings get developers involved in that process and have the project handed over to them to do something like that. You got to be on top of these strata law issues to be able to face objections from owners who are already in the community. So I think I'm going to see a lot more of that, and you no doubt are going to see a lot more of that in your space as well.
No doubt.
So can you tell us, Rob?
Interesting
go ahead.
Yes. That'll be an interesting one to come across. I'm curious to see what that outcome is going to be.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'll share it with you. I was going to invite you to share some stories from your community. If you have some wins for your members who are developing strata title or not strata title in creative ways. I know we've got a lot of different types of viewers here, investor owners who also live in freestanding homes and would probably be interested in hearing about some creative ways that people are adding value to property in your world.
Well, I might start with understanding why it's actually attractive to do property development in the first place. And that's because we have a massive population growth and they need to live somewhere. So it's about understanding how and where people are actually going. And it's called infill development. So we're trying to fill in the gaps in between where other things already are, because we already have roads, we already have schools, we already have those sorts of networks. And it's way more cost efficient for council to approve that infill development than it is to do the urban sprawl, right? And urban sprawl kind of takes us, an hour and a half away from work, whereas infill development keeps us in very close proximity. So that's the first thing, is to go, am I in an area where it's going to be in demand and where population does want to come? You then need to start looking at, well, what is the zoning of the site? So the zoning is council's determination that they're going to allow that infill development to actually occur. Now, where most people get it horribly wrong is the zoning is the maximum potential for a site. It doesn't automatically give you the right to it. So there's a whole bunch of things called an overlay, which then constrain the site. So the overlay might be tree protection, it might be flood sites, it might be bushfire, it might be a whole bunch of things like that, that suddenly the zoning potential is no longer necessarily capable. And so you've got to make that determination to say, well, just because it can be done doesn't mean it necessarily should be done. And that little statement I just made there is not just in the what are we going to build, but it's also, is there enough demand to take on this stock at this point in time? Because there needs to be the demand to justify the expense of doing it.
I think anybody who is contemplating property development who didn't have access to a community like yours and knowledge like yours, Rob, would be crazy to even start thinking about this. It seems to me, it's not something I've ever delved into, and it just appears to me to be very complex process. So much to think about, even just right from the zoning perspective.
You are correct. Unfortunately, what we do see, though, is a lot of people do take it on without knowledge and ill-informed, because they get advice. They go to a town planner and the town planner says it can be done, right? So that means council will actually accept what you're willing to put in there, but they haven't. The town planner's incentive is to get the approval. The town planner's incentive is not to make it financially viable. And so quite often you'll get an approval that actually gets through, and that person hasn't started with the end in mind and said, is there someone who's going to take this on, and what price would they actually buy it at? And then you get a development approval, you get a tick in the box, but it's not commercially viable to actually construct. And so you see a lot of DAs that then expire because they were not valid in the first place. So that's probably the first challenge. The second challenge is putting the wrong product there in the first place. So there's a terminology called highest and best use. Highest and best use is not necessarily maximum density. Okay, maximum density will create more stock, but sometimes you're better to create less stock, make it bigger, make it a little bit more opulent. It's probably going to be cheaper to construct, and it might sell for more. And when you actually do the math, more is not always better. And I think people when they're ill-informed, they look at the more and they go, well, if I can create 10 townhouses versus 5 blocks of land, I'll create the 10 townhouses. But then you actually look at, well, in the area, the demand is for land. So then, we should be creating that. And there are other times when the equation is going to be the other way around. And it's not really doing that, I guess, the research of the end user that really determines that.
And yes, I was thinking about that in terms of the area, the local area, what else is around. Do you have members that are developing properties that are nowhere near where they live or what they're familiar with, maybe in other states, and thinking, oh, it's great because it's cheap, and just making or set to make some bad decisions because they just don't understand what the area needs and what's the best use for that area?
Yeah, we do have a lot of people that do it by remote control. We don't have a lot of them. That has been extraordinarily difficult in times like COVID, where you can't go and visit the site, you can't meet your consultants and things like that. So you're adding complexity. You're also adding, I guess, cost, because you need to fly and you need accommodation and maybe a hire car to even visit site. You're adding, I guess, holding costs because your consultant wants to meet you tomorrow, but you can't get off a day from work for 3 days, and then you have to wait for the weekend. And so you're adding holding costs to the project. It makes it a really, it adds unnecessary cost and complexity. And I would not recommend it. You're much better to try and find a local area that is geographically convenient and develop there. Even if the plausible profit is slightly different, your life is going to be a heck of a lot easier.
And especially if you're dealing with strata title, where the laws are different across all of our states. So you might think you have a handle on how it works in New South Wales, different than Queensland, Victoria, across the way in WA. So yes, I can see benefits to staying close to home for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm just looking through these comments. We've had another comment here from Sean saying, I'm seeing a low-rise equivalent. I think this was my penthouse example, 2 stories becoming 3, which is the current North Sydney limit. I doubt the top floor felt they had a penthouse anyway at that height. Fair enough. But I mean, if you're on the top floor, regardless of how high it is, that's a thing. I wouldn't be too happy about a new top floor above me.
Well, you've got some engineering challenges that come into that, because if you're doing a 2-story complex, then they're generally going to do lightweight fabrication. So can it actually deal with the additional weight of that 3rd story? That is, you might get an approval for it, but from an engineering perspective, what's lying underneath, that's going to be a body corporate nightmare in the future, because it'll take a while for everything underneath to start to crack. I'd be really cautious of that one.
Good tip there, Sean. You might want to investigate that one a little bit further. Richard is saying, yes, former penthouse. Yeah, definitely. And Richard's also helpfully shared a case for anybody who's interested, Wilson and Muden Home Units, which is a New South Wales Court of Appeal case. I am quite familiar with that one, Richard. I remember looking at that. I was just, let me look at the year. Yeah, I was just going through law school at that stage. And I remember having some involvement in that case, which is one of my first introductions to strata. It's actually a company title building, Muden. And as Richard tells us there, the about to be former penthouse owner stopped the development above him. So yeah, see, to be embroiled then in litigation all the way to the Court of Appeal, not to scare your aspiring developers, Rob, but that is something that where strata developments can take you, I suppose.
Absolutely. There's a couple of other things that an aspiring developer will sometimes forget, and right now they don't have the body corporate in place or the strata in place, but in order to construct it and get the approval, they might need to get sewer or stormwater out through an adjacent property. And quite often the adjacent property is another townhouse or apartment complex. And so getting approvals to go through those are challenging, let's just say, add unnecessary cost and complexity. So this is probably a question your way. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, definitely. We see developments getting held up at that stage. We also see, and perhaps this is more relevant to more larger scale developments, where there is a need for large equipment like cranes to come in, and there is a need to enter somebody else's airspace. And when you're dealing with the airspace above an owner's corporation or a strata title building, a body corporate, then you are then having negotiations with the strata manager, the strata committee, probably the strata lawyer, about an airspace access deed. You're not necessarily dealing with your single title holder next door in the freestanding house who says, oh yeah, whatever, I don't care. You got a savvy, cashed up. They've got a fund there entity that wants to negotiate about whether they'll give you access or not, and if they are going to give you access, how much you have to pay for it. Sean's just called it out. Ground anchors or rock anchors, that's something that we see a lot as well in strata, where we've got high-rise developments going up next door and the developer wants to put rock anchors into our land. Then we're going to have a deed about that and we're going to charge you for it. So yeah, lots to think about.
But the time you're doing high rise, you can probably afford it. It's the smaller scale guys that are struggling with those sorts of costs. So yeah, you have to always be cognizant of your neighbours. It's not just the site you're doing, but everything that's happening around you.
Yes, and I suppose when you're purchasing a site with the future in mind, then understanding who your neighbours are. Is it a strata title development? I have some questions sometimes come through my website where someone says, "I've just bought next to a strata title, and they're doing this and they're doing that, and I want this and I want that," and I say, well, they're an owners corporation. You're going to have to deal with them in a certain way, and very different to having a freestanding home. So yeah, good idea to check out the neighbors.
Absolutely.
Now, do let us know, Rob. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we start to wrap up for today and let everyone know how to connect with you further?
Sure. I guess it's more, I think, reiterating what we were talking about before, is if you're trying to build a development, think about who the ultimate purchaser is actually going to be, both from what is the product? So, that's going to be the size, the shape, the amenity that sits there, and also then the rules that then sit around that. If you're not thinking about the demographic of the area, and you're not thinking about what the local amenity is around you, quite often we can do what looks like a cheap product, but we have, I guess the difference is cost versus value, right? So, too many times people are looking at the cost of doing something, whereas if we're actually providing value, then people will actually pay for that premium. So solve the ultimate owner's problems, and if you do that, they will see value, they'll pay the premium.
Nice tip. I like it. Let our viewers know, Rob, where they can go to find out more about you and the Property Developer Network and get involved with your community.
Absolutely. So we have many, many ways of getting involved, as you touched on before. But if you go to one website called Google and you type in Property Developer Network, you'll find almost all of them. So we have a Facebook community. We have a YouTube channel. We run regular networking events in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. And we have our own, members website as well. So developernetwork.com.au is the launch pad to try and jump onto all of those things. So search for Property Developer Network, you should find us. And come to our events. We run monthly events in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. They're $25 to physically attend, and we also live stream them to the entire country. So no matter where you are, anyone can turn up to any of them.
Fantastic. And I know that Rochelle does have a link that she can pop here in the comments to check out the Property Developer Network events. So we'll get that one in for our viewers. I also had a checklist, which I forgot to introduce at the top of today's show. For anybody who is interested in adding value to their strata property and maybe isn't quite ready for the full-scale development that Rob and I have been talking about today, there are lots of smaller ways that you can add value to your common property and increase your amenity and improve your lifestyle. So many so that I sat down one day and actually came up with 101 different ways that you can add value to your property. And I put it into the form of a checklist. There were actually more than that, but I thought 101 was a nice little number. So that's what it is. And you can access a free copy of that checklist over at yourstrataproperty.com.au/add value. It does have the big ticket items in there, Rob, as inspired by you and your community, about adding penthouses and adding new apartments and putting in swimming pools and lifts and all sorts of glamorous items, but also smaller things as well, like hanging artwork in your foyer, just to get home to something visually pleasing, which I think makes a difference for us all.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time today, Rob. And please do, everyone, go and check out the Property Developer Network and the good work that Rob's doing over there with his community. It's been lovely to spend Friday afternoon with you, Rob. Have you got big plans for the weekend?
I do. I'm running our event in Brisbane tomorrow, so a little bit of prep work still to go for that. Then we always socialize afterwards, Amanda. So I think of it more of a drinking club with a property problem. So if anyone wants genuine networking where you're going to, hang around with the community, then we are the place to go.
I love that. I like that as a nice hook. Drinking club / property developers. Got it. Yep. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. I can see thank yous coming in from Cheryl and Sean and Petra. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your weekend, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Rob Flux, thanks very much.
Thanks, Amanda. Bye, viewers. Bye.
Bye.